just in case you do need to leave early for whatever reason, pick up the kids or have an appointment or anything like that. Yeah, we are recording each of the sessions and they will be available in our learning management system for you to view and watch back at any time. But we'll talk a bit about our LMS a little bit later. But I'll hand you over to Max for now.
Thank you very much, Marissa. We'll do a little introduction later on, but first I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the lands on which we're gathered on today. I'm working on Bunurong lands, and I'd like to pay my respect to the traditional custodians and also acknowledge those First Nations people who are joining us today, and also the past, present, and emerging leaders within that community. Something else I just want to, I suppose, touch on at the start of this program is the way that this training had been delivered to date was via a federal program. So federal government gave the Amy Gillett Foundation some grant money to be able to go out to market and improve safer cycling infrastructure means. We were approached to basically deliver this content, the Safe Cycling Infrastructure course, continue running that. It's great stuff. We love it. We're just going to subsidize it so it's cheaper for everyone here. So all the participants, they get the subsidized rates. Unfortunately, Amy Gillett Foundation last Thursday, they've ceased to operate. The reasons for that were to do with the ongoing funding arrangement and unable to secure the federal funding for future financial years, making their business operations untenable. It then has a filter down effect for any of the existing contracts that the Amy Gillett Foundation had, not just with us, but other consultants and the like who are working within that space. So I first wanted to just acknowledge that that's kind of the state of play, where we do want to run this course because we've, committed to everyone here that, we've already sent out all the reminders. We've already got some wonderful feedback in the introductions on the LMS, and we just want to honor that as a commitment. We are doing it in a pro bono capacity, but we still want to make sure that you get all the content and the same teaching as all the other courses that we've delivered as part of this program. We've loved running this program. We were very, very close to achieving 1,000 participants by June 2024, but unfortunately we're just shy of missing that mark due to this setback about the AGF. And finally, I just wanted to close and recognise the AGF have done wonderful things over the last 17 years of operation, and this is an incredible shock to that organisation and for all the staff that we have worked with for many, many years. I just really feel for the people in that space, because it's a pretty hard arena to be worked in when you just hear that you don't have money to pay wages and things like that anymore, and it's just ceasing to exist as an entity. It's pretty devastating news for them. So I just wanted to acknowledge that kind of disappointment that I'm sure they're all feeling. In saying that, I do want to make the conversation a bit light. I don't want to be so intense the whole way through. And the way that we do run our training programs is we do like to see lots of engagement, and we like to see lots of people contributing their own thoughts and experiences. So by all means, if you see examples and you can think of similar scenarios in your own backyard that you want to share, or projects that you've worked on, we love to see that contribution. So keep that in mind as we go and run through content for today. That shared the wrong screen. Has that got the slides up, Marissa?
Yeah, we're seeing the right screen now.
Right. Righty, so today's focus is going to be on off-road cycling facilities, which is absolutely considered the best practice for riders. Riders will feel the most comfortable when they're far away from the carriageway. So the more opportunity that we have to explore the roadside, as in past the carriageway, the better opportunity we have to be able to increase that ridership, getting more people out on the saddle, and also improve the safety outcomes. So improving the perception of safety, people feel safer, but also the actual crash statistics as well, and limiting those conflict points with motor vehicles. As Marissa did allude to at the start, we record all of our sessions just in case you need to duck out or your internet drops out. Rest assured, you're welcome to rewatch these modules at a time that suits you. We certainly do encourage you coming to the live session just so you can answer or ask all your tough questions, and you get an answer in a live capacity. I'll hand over to Marissa to give us a bit of a spiel about the role of a moderator.
Thanks, Max. Yeah, I'm training coordinator at Safe System Solutions. I work very much behind the scenes, getting all our training programs up and running. I will be online throughout all of the sessions, just in the background, just keeping an eye on the chat and the Q&A, along with Ainsley, who you'll meet in a moment. If you do have any questions throughout any of the sessions, we would love for you to please pop them into the Q&A function down below at the bottom of your screen. If you pop your questions into the Q&A, Ainsley will be behind the scenes, busy answering your questions, and refer any early ones over to Max. And I'll also monitor the Q&A and the chat. Also, any comments or observations or anything you want to pop into the chat, just to freely chat about any of the content, you're welcome to pop it into the chat functions. But any specific questions for Max or Ainsley, please pop them into the Q&A. All of the slides from each of the sessions will be available on the learning management system, which we'll take you through shortly. You would have all received login details to access that LMS. You would have received emails from us on instructions on how to do that. If you haven't received those details, or if you have no idea what I'm talking about, please reach out to us. Our email is there on the screen, training@safesystemsolutions.com.au. Please reach out and I will sort your access out immediately. You will need access to the learning management system. All of our resources are housed in that LMS. So and we've got a few quizzes and a few tasks that are there for you to do if you'd like. So please reach out if you don't have access there. If any of your tech fails throughout the sessions, our good old IT systems that often don't work at the most convenient times, the quickest and easiest fix is usually just to sort of leave the webinar and jump back in, or sometimes a good old reboot. But if you are having any major dramas, please just reach out to me on the chat or by email, and I am happy to help in any way I can. That's me.
Thank you very much, Marissa. We'll also do a quick intro from Ainsley as well, please.
Yep, no worries. So, hey everyone, welcome to the training course. We're excited to get everyone in and teach you all about this safe cycling infrastructure. So a little bit about me. I work as an assistant project manager here at Safe System Solutions. So in one of our engineering teams, in the research and evaluations team. So help out with, I guess, the day-to-day engineering of the company, and then get involved with this cycling infrastructure course as well with the moderating. So as Marissa mentioned, I'll be online answering any of the questions that you pop into the Q&A and the chat as well. So definitely recommend any kind of questions about the course content, if you can pop them into the Q&A, and we'll get you an answer to those where we can, or we'll put Max on the spot and let him give it a crack. But excited to have you all on board and look forward to seeing all the questions that come through.
Sounds like a plan. Thank you very much, Ainsley. For those that I haven't met, my name is Max McArdle. I'm Engineering Operations Manager at Safe System Solutions. Very, very active in the cycling infrastructure and pedestrian safety space. Been riding bikes since I was a kid, used to ride to school, things like that, and still very much enjoy getting around on two wheels and being on the saddle. Very much kind of a commuter, recreational cyclist. I don't do it for fitness. I don't do hills. I actually avoid hills. I'm just not built for it. Unless I'm on the e-bike, love the e-bike. Certainly not against power-assisted traveling. Yeah, Ben, my background, I started actually as a graduate engineer in VicRoads or Department of Transport and Planning. Got to work on some cycling projects, which I suppose, yeah, was one of the catalysts for getting involved in this space. I just think there's many wonderful benefits associated with cycling, the improved equity, social, economic benefits, environmental benefits, health benefits. Just any way you look at it, there's wonderful things to say about cycling, and it's very important that I'm able to develop and share this kind of infrastructure knowledge so that we can see more of our safe cycling bike lanes and things like that getting implemented across our networks. Our principal engineer, Ken Beer, this was pre-mustache, this photo. He's, of course, got a gorgeous handlebar-esque mustache at the moment. He's also been heavily involved within this space for many years, and he has peer-reviewed all the content here, co-developed it all. Rest assured, what I'm not 100% sure on, Ken would know, and we kind of play tick-for-tack there. So between us, very confident in being able to answer any of your questions within this space. But Ken is also very passionate about improving safety for bike riders in particular, and is also quite an avid cyclist. Marissa touched on before that we've got a learning management system. Really important you've got those details and you're able to log in. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, please reach out to the training circle so they can facilitate that for you. To make sure that we've got eyes on the screen and some focus on the content that we're going through as part of today's session, we've included our wee little friend here, Wally the Wombat. And Wally the Wombat is going to appear randomly on specific slides. And it's your job just to count how many times you spot Wally, okay? So you've got a little piece of scrap paper or anything like that and just take a tally every time you see Wally. This one is not included in your count. So you're currently at 0 Wallies, but there will be Wallies throughout the presentation. We actually have a quiz question as well at the end of the module where the question will be, how many times did you see Wally? So that's how we're managing to get you hopefully focused on this screen and not just answering emails or going out the backyard and checking how the carrots are growing or anything like that. We just want to make sure we've got the bit of focus as we go through this webinar. Now, the benchmarks for completion of this course has actually shifted somewhat from the way that we would have delivered this previously. Previously, we still have 2 quizzes and we have 2 assignments. The 2 quizzes we're making compulsory. You need to complete those ones. The 2 assignments are optional. And the reason that they are optional is we're unfortunately unable to commit our resources to go through the marking of all of the assignments. I'm sure you can appreciate we've got over 100 participants in today's course, and for us to actually allocate numerous hours and multiple personnel to go through all of those assignments, it is quite a big resource allocation. So we're not actually going to force any participant to complete the assignments because we're unable at this time to provide a grade on that or provide any specific feedback. The only thing that we'll be requiring is you complete the quizzes because they give you an automatic score, and that will give you whether or not you're going to pass the course, basically. So it's a little refined or distilled in that sense. That's the real shift in the way that we're running this program. We're just unable to commit to those assignment marking, and I hope you can all appreciate why we've come to that decision. But yeah, it's still an opportunity for you to complete those if you are interested in doing them as assignments. For the quizzes though, we do require a minimum pass mark of 80%. And it sounds pretty high, and it is pretty high, but you do get up to 3 attempts. If you're on your second attempt and you're not sure why you got a question wrong, we just strongly encourage you to give us a call or drop us an email, and we'll be happy to coach you through that, because we don't want anyone walking away feeling frustrated that they were unable to get to the right answer. We're happy to give you that additional, one-on-one coaching to be able to get that certificate in your hands. All right, to kick off the day, I'll let Marissa launch a poll. So shortly you'll see something pop up on your screen, and it's just a simple question, just a self-reflection of how you rate your current level of cycling infrastructure knowledge. So whether you would consider yourself very knowledgeable, aware but don't know much, or not aware. I'll let that just run in the background. Just have a go at that, and you can move those polls and any pop-up things, just move them around onto another screen so you're not blocking this slide. Do whatever's convenient for you. Okie dokie. So the agenda for today, as I mentioned, we are going to start off with a focus on off-road paths. And most commonly, the way that they look is shared paths. A shared path is just a pedestrian footpath and a bicycle path together. It's shared. Okay. We'll look at the specific design considerations associated with shared path design, specifically path widths, what type of gradients are appropriate. We'll talk about some common hazards that we find adjacent shared paths, as well as some sightline restrictions and some calculations associated with that, as well as some fencing, and what would be considered appropriate fencing along shared paths. Now, we do invariably interact with roads at some points in time when we've got shared paths. It's not just limitless mid-block sections. There are intersections with roads. So we'll have a chat about, well, how can we manage that conflict point with vehicle traffic? And what can we do to improve the safety for our vulnerable road users, which is our pedestrians and our bike riders. Finally, the last part of today, we'll just be going through what we can do when there's actually intersections with other shared paths. So shared paths interacting with other shared paths. We'll have a quick chat about wayfinding signage, as well as what we can install to help manage cyclist speeds at conflict paths. Now, I'll acknowledge at this point in time that because we are a far-reaching audience that we've got gathered here today, so we're covering all corners of Australia, and I believe we've got some participants from New Zealand as well. So the way that we've kind of shared all of our knowledge in this forum is to review what different jurisdictions are doing across Australia and New Zealand. And we've kind of cherry-picked, I guess, what would be considered best practice, or what is, the easiest figure to comprehend, things like that. So just a heads up, some of the things you see may not be completely, applicable to your jurisdiction. Things like signage, things like line marking and pavement marking, the way that we do it in different states and territories, we've all got our own quirks. I personally don't think there's one right way to do it, but we're not homogenous. It's not all consistent. So some of the things that we're showing might look a little bit different in your jurisdiction, but the principles are absolutely transferable. And that's kind of the information that we want to be able to equip you with. You understand the principle, and then you can take that and apply it to your jurisdictions and, your specific supplements and things like that. Okay, so to get started, I've got an example here of a beautiful bicycle path. This one is just heading into Melbourne CBD. And it's actually not an example of a shared path, because what I've got here, we can see the bike riders, is an exclusive bike path. So the way that this is meant to operate and designed to operate is that riders travel in this facility, and then pedestrians, you get to walk along the esplanade area. So you get to walk closer to the, the waterfront where all the nice boats are and things like that. The reason this is delineated as two different transport modes is because, as I mentioned, this is a corridor into the CBD for cycling, and it is a very, very popular route for commuter riders. And commuter riders generally like to travel at quite high speeds. A shared path would bring pedestrians into that space as well. When you've got high volumes of riders and pedestrians, it's actually very difficult to maintain a high level of service for both of those users. So instead of just automatically thinking, if we're doing an off-road facility, it needs to be a shared path, you can do two separate facilities, one for a bike path, one for a footpath, split the two modes. You may have noticed that I was using kind of hedging language there and saying pedestrians are meant to use the waterfront esplanade area. It doesn't work like that in practice. You do get pedestrians using the exclusive bike path, but the way that the design has been set up is actually to completely separate those two modes. So you're reducing the risk of that commingling and the risk of the weaving in and out of traffic as riders pass through that section. To help give that argument some evidence or a basis to support that, I'd just refer to this Austroads Guide to Road Design Part 6A figure. Something else that we do within this program is we make sure to include all of our sources. They're usually at the bottom of the screen, just in case you need to double check exactly what we're saying, or you want to dive into the detail further. That's completely fine. We absolutely encourage you doing that. Just made it nice and easy for you to find exactly where we get all this information from. This figure out of the Austroads Guide, along the y-axis, we've got the number of pedestrians two-way per peak hour. Such a mouthful. I always hate saying this. And along the x-axis, we've got number of cyclists two-way per peak period. Doesn't get easier. As all it's saying is basically how many riders are you expecting during the peak time and how many pedestrians are you expecting, okay? I'm going to just focus on the extremities of this graph. And if we have a look in the top right-hand corner, we can see, okay, we've got lots and lots of riders. We've got lots and lots of pedestrians. What's actually being recommended is a 4-meter wide bike path and a 4-meter wide footpath. So just wanted to reiterate that we shouldn't just be going straight to, if we're looking at off-road facilities, let's just build a shared path, because that may not actually be the most appropriate thing. Instead, reflect on what volumes are anticipated or what you've got expected, and that could help you make a decision of what type of facility could be appropriate. So the 3-meter shared path, which is pretty common, you can see that it's only really within this field here that is being recommended, but as volumes get higher and higher, particularly pedestrian volumes, that's not being recommended. A few other points to consider is these, just like all figures and guidelines, should be taken as aspirational. That's what we're aiming for. absolutely better to have a 3-meter wide shared path than do nothing at all. So don't see this as this is what you have to do. Otherwise you can't do it and you just can't provide for provision for anything. But this should be what we are actually aspiring towards, because we know that that is going to provide a better level of service for both people walking and people riding. Another way that we commonly see a shared path width being adopted is out of the Austroads Guide once again. And it's this very, very hazy definition of kind of defining what the path function is. And there's these 3 categories noted within this space. One is a local access path. The middle one is recreational. The one on the right is, the middle is regional. The one on the right is recreational. I'll start with the local access path, where it's saying minimum width between 2 meters and typical maximum is about 3, or looking for a desirable of about 2.5. The local access path, you can kind of think of it like a local street. You know, if you go reflect on your road use hierarchy, this is not expected to have an arterial function for shared paths. It's basically going to be connecting to an isolated residential community that probably doesn't have further connections beyond that. And that's when you could look at having narrower paths. My real caveat in saying that is a 2-meter wide path is rarely appropriate for shared paths. Have a look at this photo here of a 2-meter wide shared path. Well, my pen's really getting very antsy today. I'm not sure why. This 2-meter wide shared path is really not catering for 2 people walking side by side. There's no space there whatsoever for a rider to pass them, or, you know, to try and overtake them or come the other way. So don't really agree on just aiming for the minimums. They rarely ever work in reality. The other thing about this particular site is if you consider that the fence that's so close to the edge of the shared path, as well as the utility pole, that actually squeezes this shared path even further. And that 2-meter width would feel closer to 1.5, something like that, for 2 ways of travel, which is basically just a footpath. So certainly be hesitant just going straight for minimum widths. A regional path is more when you've got a bit more of that arterial function, where you are expecting the commuter riders to be using. You'd be expecting relatively higher cycling speeds as well. And the widths kind of stipulated for this type of category is anywhere between 2.5 and 4 meters. The 3 meters seems to be the rule of thumb consistently, but there's always an argument to try and, you know, reflect on what future demand for that facility may look like, and what are the anticipated volumes that you are expecting to utilize that shared path, and trying to take that, you know, figure from Austroads and really use that as, well, this is what I'm basing my design on, and I think it should be a wider design because of this kind of data. Recreational path, I'll be completely honest, the way that the regional and the recreational path is separated within the Austroads Guide is very hazy. It's very nebulous, the difference between the two. The recreational path may have adjacent facilities where people, parents with prams, may also be joining. So it's not just walkers and cyclists. You may have a playground there, or there could be a school adjacent there, and you might have wider facilities because of that, but not really well spelled out at all, the clear distinction between those 2 categories. It's generally just considered a local path or something with a more arterial function. Marissa.
Yeah, Max, we've just got a question on that. How do we convince MRPV to budge on these things? They seem to have a blank statement of 3 meters SUP and that's it. No more and no less, even based on this figure.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, MRPV do wonderful work in trying to, provide these upgrades to our transport network, and they often have to work within very constrained environments and are often completely aware of the implications of adopting larger footprints or widening out shared paths and what that could mean. So I fully respect those kind of constraints that they work from. How could we better advocate for those wider facilities? I think what our job is, as people that are really involved in cycling infrastructure or interested in the advocacy or whatever it is, we can use our influence and our knowledge of these guides to be like, we know that it is a safety issue when there are narrow paths. We know that it does cause riders to weave in and out of pedestrians, which provides a poor level of service for riders and pedestrians. And we can also back that up with what Austroads is actually telling us to do, which is, in this scenario, we should be building, a 4-meter wide facility or whatever it is. So I think just trying to be objective and trying to provide that evidence to MRPV or whichever client it is, it doesn't necessarily have to be them. Just trying to make that a really hard sale that this is what we should be doing and not just going for those minimum guidelines.
Okay. And how do these standards work with temporary path arrangements during construction?
Oh, that's a very good question. It seems, and this is me just talking practically in my experience, it seems all of these rules and guidelines are thrown out the window when it comes to temporary detours and things like that. I think that we do an okay job managing vehicle detours. We acknowledge if that route is appropriate for the detouring traffic. Can heavy vehicles use that alternate corridor and things like that? But when it comes to bike riders, generally is a bit of an afterthought, particularly in like more local settings. There's an on-road bike lane and that just gets closed. It's actually common just to see bike lane closed and that's it. I've actually got, I think, a slide on today's session with that kind of context. Yeah, in the short answer is I don't think that those guidelines are well followed during the temporary traffic management schemes, and there's definitely more work that can be done within that space. No worries. So got now another diagram figure for us to look at, which is considering the gradient or the steepness of a shared path and what would be considered kind of desirable or what would be considered acceptable. This diagram is easily 20 years old, adopted from a US journal. And, there probably is some interest in perhaps revisiting this, particularly as we have seen the fleets of our cycling, our bicycle fleet has changed over those years. We are seeing more e-bikes that have no issues at all getting up really, really steep hills. But just wanted to acknowledge that this has been based on, your traditional average bicycle. And what we're looking at is along the y-axis, we've got the length of the gradient. And along the x-axis, we've got the gradient as a percentage. I'll just pick a number as an example. If you've got a 10% gradient, 10%, if you're not familiar, is very, very steep. You would absolutely know if you are riding or walking up 10%. You would feel that. You feel that in your calves. It's saying it's desirable to limit that to around 10 meters. And the reason that it's suggesting that is because if you go any further, riders may not use this as a route. Riders just might not find this facility attractive and actively avoid this section of the network, which obviously is not a great outcome. So it's very, very useful to refer to this if you are doing any shared path design and just do some checks along your alignment plans to check how your gradients are looking. Whilst that figure does refer to riding uphill, it's really important that we also consider the opposing direction as well. And we have to think about, well, riders are going to be presumably traveling downhill at that same location as well. So what are the types of risks that could be associated with that? So I'm actually going to open this one up to the chat and let you pop in your own thoughts. And let's say you're looking at the left-hand photo here, and you are a bike rider and you're about to travel down this ramp. Yep, you're about to just ride down here to connect to the shared path. What are the kind of risks that you could potentially envisage with this situation that perhaps could be addressed or you think would be worth looking at? So think about riding downhill at this location. What are the risks associated with that type of movement? I'll give you 30 seconds to have a go there. Where's up?
Max, we've got a question while those comments are coming in. What is hierarchy between standards regarding gradient, for example, between Austroads and DDA 1428?
Good question. So you absolutely need to make sure that you are compliant with your DDA requirements, Disability Discrimination Act. It is one of those areas, if you've ever worked within, the technical design space, you know that there are just a raft of different documents that you need to be achieving. You're basically achieving all the criteria, and it's very, very uncommon to meet all of that criteria. But the DDA is certainly a very big one. And you definitely want to make sure that you're doing what you can to make sure that all of those, specific handrail heights and ramp gradients and all of those things are met. Cool. So I saw lots of good answers coming through as I was chatting through then. And I think, yes, speed is absolutely spot on. If you were just using good old-fashioned gravity and just letting the ramp kind of drag you down, you'd be quite comfortably at a speed of 20, 25 kilometers per hour by the time you get to the toe of the ramp. And right at the bottom of the ramp is a conflict point. So that's where another shared path happens to connect. Not a great setup at all. So we want to think about if we've got any kind of ramps or gradients, sections of steep vertical areas, what is really occurring in that mid block and what's occurring at the toe of that section, because we know we're going to get high speeds and we don't want to have any conflict points. Another thing that is really exacerbates this as a risk is the beautiful kind of fencing or the parapet that's been installed on the ramp. It provides just like a wall where it's very, very difficult for you to be able to see any other shared paths users that could be trying to join in onto your path. So not a great design outcome here. This is actually one that we conducted a road safety audit on. So you can conduct road safety audits exclusively for shared paths. And we brought this up as a finding. We were concerned about the speed of cyclists and also the significant sightline restrictions where there is that conflict point. And so we recommended let's just try and move the shared path connection further down, make it clear who's got the priority there as well. Just so, if you bring it further down, sight lines are better, and also riders have washed off some of that speed from traveling down that hill section. Very happy to say that that has been installed since this photo was taken, and yeah, we've seen that safety outcome achieved. So good to see lots of people picked up on that. I've got now just a figure showing the operating width or design envelope for a bike rider. So you'd probably be aware that we have, general vehicle design envelopes. We have heavy vehicle design envelopes. We also have design envelopes for cyclists as well. Slightly different depending on which jurisdiction you're in. I should just clarify. The one I've got on the screen is from New South Wales. Some reason different states do different things. The one in particular that tends to be altered a little bit is the head clearance, but we'll chat through this one in particular. You will need to reflect on whichever part of the world you're dialing in from. First thing is the operating width of the bicycle and the rider. Take it at a very constant 1 meter. So that's pretty easy to remember. Just a 1 meter wide operating width. Now, that is when riders are basically in a nice flat terrain. However, when riders are traveling uphill, they tend to be going in this kind of wobbling fashion just to be able to pick up momentum to climb the hill. And that kind of action actually increases the operating width. And so you'd adopt something more like a 1.5 meter wide operating width in those scenarios. That could then have a run-on effect of how you design the facility or the any of the hazards that could be there present in that facility. The other thing to note, as I said, height of the bicycle and rider is around 2.2, and the head clearance is taken at 200 mil. As I said, slightly different depending on where you are from. The reason that that head clearance becomes important is if you've got riders that are traveling through an underpass type of facility or a tunnel, that's really when that head clearance is very relevant. But also things like vegetation, as that grows above a shared path, this kind of envelope can help give you some information of when things could get a bit too close to riders and when things might need to be looked at or mitigated. The other really important dimension there that we should be aware of is the distance from the edge of the operating width to any fixed rigid hazard. So it could be a utility pole, it could be a fire hydrant, it could be a tree, whatever it is. Generally, we take the half meter. So it's saying half meter is desirable, but I would say that is industry standard. Just half meter from the edge of the operating width to a hazard. If it's outside of that space, it's deemed a bit too far away and not something that we need to recognize at this stage, depending on what it is, I should clarify. The 0.2 meter minimum there, that's really only applicable if it's a flexible thing or if it's actually designed to be struck by a rider and they're going to be okay. So just remember the half meter desirable. That's the best way to remember it. I've also included just another diagram to give you some perception or perspective of what type of speeds we're talking about for riders. So generally on shared paths, you could be looking at riders going from 5 kilometers an hour to 25 kilometers per hour. Faster than that tend to get riders using on-road facilities, just because they don't want to have to try and weave in and out of pedestrian traffic. But that kind of range there is what you're looking at for riders there. Marissa?
Max, just a couple comments. There is a big difference between the eye height of a rider, 1.4 meters, and the height of a bicycle and rider, 2.2 meters. Can you clarify this difference, please?
It's a good question. Eye height is 1.4, height was 2.2. Yeah, you know what? I can't say I've really questioned that too much, but that is about an 800 mil difference. It does seem a lot. It's probably thinking about a rider in the worst case scenario, which would be standing on their pedals as opposed to sitting down. But even then, 800 mil does sound like quite a significant jump. I'll open that up to the chat if anyone.
Yeah, we've got a few comments saying perhaps standing on pedals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just worst case scenario, like someone's actually standing up on their pedal, and that's the clearance that has been adopted there, whereas the eye height of the rider is sitting down. But I still think 800 seems like a lot. I wouldn't have thought standing up would have, you know. Good question. I like to be challenged.
Yeah, no, a good couple comments and funny comments in there too, might add. There was another question. In the previous example, why do you think this was not picked up earlier by an RSA during design?
Good question. I happen to live near that walkway, and I remember when that was constructed. It was all the rage back in the day. I'm going to say about 2006, and whenever that walkway was constructed, you know, there probably wasn't that same understanding or perspective of riders going through there. It was probably, we need to provide a grade separation solution for riders. This is where we'll put them. These are the ramp grades that we have to work with. Job done. Now I think we're more in the space of recognizing, well, what are the potential affiliated risks with that as a design solution, and thinking a bit broader about those risks. But I don't really have the answer. That's just my gut feel. It was more just to clearly meet that project objective of grade separate, get them over the road, and then get them out of here. That's their job done.
Great, thank you.
Previous auditor didn't do this course either, so that's probably it. Some common hazards that we do find along shared paths. So kind of bins or any other furniture, I suppose you could call it. This is a good example of one where during the design, you would have been nice to just have flipped where that pole is meant to go. So it's not actually in the shared path. You can get all of that off the shared path. That'd be great. Drop-offs, super common. In this example, it's a constructed concrete shared path, and you can see kind of the full vertical face of that concrete. So what's likely happened is, you know, the contractor has gone out there, compacted all the ground, they've done their formwork, poured the slabs, and then taken the formwork off, and then job done. But that has then left this drop off where you can see the full concrete face there. So what we certainly recommend in areas like this is just ensuring that the job is done once you've actually backfilled that area, using, you know, hopefully a smoother surface than those big boulder rocks there, and just ensuring that you've got flush adjacent surface there. Okay. Because at the moment, that kind of gap is just not trafficable for most bikes, unless you've got a mountain bike. If you're coming off there, you're not going to make it back onto the shared path. You're coming off your bike. So definitely want to see things like that getting picked up in the design and ensuring that for those out there in the construction side of things, that you're picking up on those issues. Another common hazard, pretty challenging to see, but there is a utility pole at the edge of this shared path. I guess there's two hazards here. One is the vegetation that is blocking, the sightlines to that hazard, and then the hazard itself being the utility pole. Before I mentioned what we take is the 0.5 meter from the edge of the operating width to any hazard. And if it's within that space, we would consider it a hazard. In practice, the way that tends to work is you take 0.5 meter offset from the edge of the shared path, right? So in other words, you just accept that the edge of the operating space for the bike rider coincides with the edge of the shared path, which is a pretty reasonable assumption. What that means is if you are a designer and you've got things in aerial view, maybe I'll just draw this out to help clarify things. If you were designing a shared path and it looks like that, you would take this line and then apply a 0.5 meter offset. So it looks something like that. It could basically look like a shoulder. And you would be able to quickly identify if there's any trees, or there's any signs, or anything like that, any fixed, rigid structures, or anything at all, within that space, that could be classified as a hazard. And your job as a designer is to try and either shift the shared path to move away from those things or relocate the hazards. Okay, so that's kind of how it works in practice. Yeah. Of course, if you don't have that luxury and you are working in the retrofit space and you're just trying to delineate the hazard, this is not removing the hazard, so the risk still exists. But what we have seen being utilized is flexible paddles on shared paths, as well as line marking showing that, the path is narrowing. This is by no means best practice. You don't want to be doing this. This to me is an afterthought. You want to be picking up this during the design. You want to, basically maintain that width of the bicycle, of the shared path facility all the way through. So yeah, if this had been picked up during the design, that shared path could have been kept consistent. And this signpost just could have been moved into that embankment and build like a retaining wall structure. It doesn't need to be that big. That's a bit dramatic, but just ensure that you're able to support all of that surrounding embankment there. So that's just a few words on common hazards that we do find adjacent shared paths. Of course, there's numerous. There's plenty that we could have talked through about there. I might hit the pause there, Marissa and Ainsley, and give everyone a chance just to get a glass of water or make a cup of tea, just to make sure that we're all refreshed and we're feeling okay to complete the rest of the session. So I'll give everyone a 3-minute break, and in 3 minutes' time, we'll get cracking again with all the content. So 3 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, and I'll just quickly check in with Ainsley, Marissa, to see if there's anything that I missed in the break.
Yeah, we have a question in the chat. Would the retaining wall cutout become a hazard in its own right?
Good question. Pretty valid. Absolutely, it could be, but I'd like to think that our geotech and structural friends would be able to design something where you could maintain a 0.5 meter offset and perhaps build a retaining wall that isn't going to be right up against the adjacent shared path.
I was going to read out Josh's one that just came in with regards to offsets to paths in constrained locations. Would it be more desirable to reduce the width of the path to maintain a 0.5 meter clearance, or alternatively, would it be a preferred treatment to reduce these offset widths to maintain desirable offsets from the edge of the path that maintain desirable path widths? It's a mouthful.
I'll let you answer this one, Marissa.
Well, let me just find out.
It's a good question, and it's not something that I'm afraid has a uniform response. The first question I'd be asking is, if you're unable to meet the 0.5 meter offset to any hazards, well, what are those hazards? If it's, you know, isolated instances of trees, then, you know, probably I wouldn't worry about touching the cross section for the shared path. I'd just maintain and just recognize that there's isolated areas of higher risk. You could also look to protect those isolated areas with cycle-friendly fencing, which we also talk about today. But conversely, if the hazard was consistently 100 mil off the edge of the shared path and they present a significant risk, say a fence that has cyclone barbed wire mesh fencing on the top, then I would be trying to narrow the shared path, because I think it's really important that we get riders away from that. So that's just a general assessment of it, but it kind of depends on what you're looking at. You're on mute there, Marissa.
Thanks. Sorry, I was just saying thank you, and I'll throw over to Ainsley now.
I think we're all good in the Q&A at the moment. Thanks, Max.
No worries.
We just had one pop into the chat.
Yep.
If we want to take that now, would it be a reasonable approach to proceed using a risk assessment based approach then?
Absolutely. Strongly agree with that. Have a bit of a chat around what would be a higher risk to adopt a narrower cross section, or to maintain the cross section and potentially get closer to the hazards. Have a bit of a workshop around what those situations and scenarios look like, and then develop that risk profile. I think that's a really good suggestion.
Great, thank you.
Pleasure. So we'll keep chatting through, and next part, just wanted to make a note that we do have sightline requirements for bike riders. So for those that have worked, you know, within traffic engineering, transport planning, any kind of technical design roles, you'd certainly be aware of stopping sight distance calculations, both for horizontal curves and for vertical curves. So horizontal just means, like, can you see enough around the bend? So if there's a hazard there, you can stop in time. And the vertical is like, is there a crest on the hill that you're able to see over? If there's a hazard there, can you stop in time? Just wanted to make a note that we have calculations just for bike riders, perfectly suited for shared path uses. So if you are in that space, just make a note of that wonderful calculation there. Very, very similar to what we do with stopping sight distances for general vehicles. Obviously, just tailoring this for the speeds and friction resistance of bicycle tires as opposed to vehicle tires. You don't have to do that as part of your quiz or anything. Appreciate not everyone has that skill set, and that's okay. This is what I was talking about, just the sight distances and why you'd be doing these kind of checks. If there is an object that is situated on the shared path, you just want to make sure that that bike rider has got enough space to be able to slow down before they strike that object. And it could be a hazard like a fallen down tree, or it could be pavement that has failed. I'm going to let my dog out of the room because he's having a bit of a stretch. Hey. Sorry about that. So that's the reason you'd like to make sure that you've done those kind of checks periodically throughout the alignment, just so it's clear whether or not we're able to maintain those distances. And just as a real life example, this is a shared path. It might not look like it, but it is actually fully sealed. It's asphalt, sealed a long time ago. But if you're riding along here and, potentially there's someone that's fallen over onto the shared path, or there's a wild kangaroo that you want to avoid or something like that, because of the vegetation that's grown there, your sight lines are quite restricted, and therefore you run the risk of actually colliding with that hazard, which might not be the best outcome. So pretty common as you're doing these sightline checks, just to make sure that you open up the sight lines, make sure that you don't have vegetation that's going to be growing massive. And if it does grow very, very large, then just trimming that back and maintaining that so you're able to maintain those sight distances. All right, we'll move on to fencing now. I alluded to this a little bit before, but basically there might be areas where we are unable to relocate the shared path to move away from the hazards. We may be unable to relocate the hazard itself. So perhaps we're looking at actually installing fencing, similar to like a barrier system for vehicles. We've got fencing for cyclists, just so that they are shielded from that path hazard. Okay? The two main reasons that we'd put in fencing, though, is because we've either got a significant vertical drop, so think of like a cliff, or we've got a really, really steep embankment. Those are the two primary reasons that we put it in, but certainly not uncommon to see fences being put in because there's a building that's really close, and there's just concern with riders hitting the side of that building. I've seen that being installed. There's a myriad of different reasons, but I'll just look at what Austroads is telling us. So I'll look at the left-hand diagram first, which is when we would put in a fence when there is a drop-off. And the figure that we will be referring to, the letters that we'll be looking at, is X, which represents the distance from the edge of the shared path to wherever that drop-off is, and Y. And Y is just the height of that drop-off. So the first row of this table is telling me that I don't require a fence when X is less than 2 meters and Y is less than 250 mil. And the reason that they're saying the fence is not required is because instead they're saying just batter off the surface. So I kind of drew that out before, but it just means getting some fill material, compacting it, do a nice little batter or a very gentle slope there, because that's really all that's required. Don't worry about a fence. The next two rows indicate whether you would be going for a partial barrier fence or a full barrier fence. I'll explain on the next slide exactly the difference between those two. Basically, the way that we categorize it for drop-offs, if the Y value or the drop-off height is between 250 mil and 2 meters, go for a partial barrier fence. Anything above that, go for a full barrier fence, okay? Should just pause there and say, if you've got a 2 meter tall drop-off, that is huge. Like, that is very, very significant. So it shouldn't be surprising that you need a fence there. That absolutely should be protected. We'll look at the right-hand side now. So this figure here is demonstrating when the adjacent embankment gets steep enough that would be putting in a fence. And the way that it's actually measured is, once again, X, which is the distance from the edge of the shared path to the hinge point, as it's referred to, or just the top of the embankment. And the ratio that is used is 1 to Z. So 1 high, Z wide. Just a common kind of formula used within slopes. Rise over run, if you want to go back to mathematic days. Anyway, fence isn't required if we've got a very, very flat kind of slope there, depending on how close you get to that hinge point. But the closer, the steeper that you get, or the lower that Z value is, the more likely you're going to require either a partial barrier or a full barrier fence. This is the difference between the two fences. So the first image that I'm showing here is a partial barrier fence. And the reason it's referred to as that is because there are these windows where potentially people can fall in, particularly little people, toddlers. Okay. We had a participant actually share with us a few months ago that they had an example of this where they were riding with their child, and the child fell through one of those partial barrier fences. So they will not stop all people from accessing the adjacent hazard. Not fantastic. A full barrier fence has got vertical members consistently spaced out through there, just to eliminate that as a risk. You can see it's impossible to go through there. There is always the risk of going over it. It's pretty negligible risk, but certainly doing a very good job of eliminating that through passage. I genuinely think that this is overly complicated, and I'm not really sure why this categorization was set up this way. If anyone does know, I'd be more than happy to have a chat around this. To me, I tend to be going for the full barrier fences because I think we should be protecting everyone and not just the bigger adults, but also considering others that can fall through there. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents. The other really important feature that we would like to see on all of our fencing is this idea of a smooth rail or a smooth deflection rail. That's the feature that we commonly refer to as cycle-friendly fencing. And it's actually designed so that if you're riding your bike and you collide with this fence, the first thing you're going to hit is this smooth deflection rail because it actually juts out. It protrudes from the fence. The other benefit is it is deliberately designed so that the first part of the envelope that hits this is your arm. It's at the height between your shoulder and your wrist. So your handlebar is not going to collide with it, so there's no snagging risk. Those kind of design solutions make it much more likely for an errant rider to actually be able to stay on their bike and reduces that risk of destabilization. So big fan, cycle-friendly fencing. There's numerous manufacturers out there that have their own bespoke products. I have no, product stance. You just work with whatever works in your jurisdiction. But just make sure that you've got a smooth rail. There's nothing for handlebars to get snagged on, and that they are set at an appropriate height there. The final thing I'll say about this picture is in the bottom image, you can see that the signpost has been installed on the shared path sign. Don't do that one. You want to make sure that they're installed behind the fence, just in case you do get an errant rider and they're kind of using the smooth rail and deflecting along it. Having a rigid signpost there, it's basically just going to guide them straight into that post. So you put all your signs on the other side of the fence. Um, another one quickly on fencing. Oh, Marissa.
Did you want to cover this slide first, Max, before you took some questions?
No, let's
No?
chat.
Okay. Yeah, just some questions coming in about fencing. And you may have covered some of this, but all right. Is the standard for fencing just for straight sections?
No, that would be applied, I suppose, consistently along the alignment.
Yeah, okay. And we've got a question, what's the minimum distance requirement between the actual fence and the edge of the path?
So that's before when I mentioned the like 0.2 minimum is what could be adopted. That's
Yep.
generally where you'd see cycle-friendly fencing enacted.
Yep.
Perfect world, you'd still keep it half a meter away, but appreciate you're probably trying to protect hazards that are in that space. So you might have to bring it closer
Yep.
to the path.
Yep. Okay. And do you have an example of a partial barrier fence?
I'm sure I could dig some out. That was an example there on the top there, the partial
Okay.
barrier. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Just reading through some of the comments. Could there be a combination between visibility through the fence for sight distance versus risk of fall?
Absolutely. That is a very genuine risk. The fencing does once again act like a wall and can create those sightline obstructions. Once again, perfect example of where you may employ kind of a risk assessment framework to try and weigh up the pros and cons of having the fence, not having the fence, having the sightline, impacts versus not having that, and trying to nut out what would be the best scenario. Because I'm still yet to work on a design, Marissa, where every single criteria is perfect, and you do kind of need to make these professional judgment calls.
Yeah, okay. And I think the last one at the moment, Austroads talks about 1.4 meter high fence for a big drop. Will that be too high for the shoulder? The picture shows that the eye height is about 1.54 meters. So should we use 1.4 meters?
I would be recommending, I suppose, what it's stating there within the Austroads figure. I haven't got that document in front of me, but yeah, if it's saying to provide that level of containment in those scenarios, then I'd be going for that.
Yeah.
In these examples, the deflection rail is about 1.2, but it can be higher.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we've got one saying this figure says that we don't want bars curved or protruding towards the rider, but the previous slide says that you want a deflection rail with 150 millimeter handle bar space.
Yep. So we don't want vertical members that are protruding. So see like that post, if that protruding horizontal deflection wasn't there and that post was protruding out, you could see how quickly that could become a snagging risk. Similarly, like these little brackets, if that was not protected by the deflection rail, they would become the protruding member that we want to avoid.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you, Max.
No worries. Yeah, this slide also might cover off on some of that detail as well. So longitudinal fences with rounded posts, smooth railings, don't want sharp, blunt edges, obviously. Fences or bollards curving towards the rider, anything with sharp points is not something that we're too fond of. So that's those scenarios there where you can get the handlebar kind of stuck into those spaces. Even this one is not great illustrated. You'd have a deflection rail there to help reduce that as a risk. Also important to note that things at low level can also be a hazard for pedal strike. Generally, what you're looking at there is around the 200 mil mark. could be seen as something where a rider could strike their pedal and have that destabilizing effect. Shared paths crossing over roads. So I'm going to move on to our next topic for the day. And I'll move the banner down a bit so we can have a better look. And Marissa, if you don't mind just launching a poll for today as well, just to close off the discussion on fencing. I just want to hear your thoughts on whether you think we should be installing fencing along this shared path. And I'll draw a little diagram of what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a fence in this type of location with the smooth deflection rail protruding out and things like that. Would you be recommending that? Do you think it should be installed to improve safety? I'll give you 15 seconds to give that a go. We'll give it another 5 seconds. No stress if you're not 100% sure. Just give it a crack. And we'll end the poll and share the results. And yeah, we're getting a pretty clear majority there saying that they would not install the fencing at this location. And I tend to agree. I don't think there's significant risks that we would need to be protecting, but I can appreciate, you know, from just taking the information I've provided, maybe you're thinking about this signpost and perhaps you think that is within that half-meter tolerance. Perhaps we need a fence, you know, to reduce the risk of errant riders striking that. But general rule of thumb, looking along this alignment, it looks like there's just lots of vegetation adjacent the area. So not a significant risks that can be identified throughout that kind of section. But yeah, good to see that there's generally a consensus that we wouldn't be installing the fencing there. Now, we've actually got an example here of the shared path crossing over a road. This one's actually relatively unique. It's not an incredibly common cross section. It's a divided carriageway. So I've got traffic, 2 lanes of traffic going that way. You can't really see the other traffic lanes, but they're on the other side of the shared path, traveling that way. And we're, as a rider, basically in the middle of the carriageway, even though we're not on the road. It's the median. That's where we've got our own space. Because we do still need to facilitate traffic crossing over this median, we've had to create median openings to ensure that they're still able to access local stride streets, perform U-turns, whatever it is. And so there are conflict points with this shared path that's being constructed in the median and where that traffic needs to cross over. The way that the shared path crossing over roads has been managed is through a raised crossing point. And that's something that we really strongly advocate for numerous reasons. Number one, if you're riding through here, as you get to the conflict points, you get to stay on one level. So you're not being forced to kind of go down a curb ramp onto the carriageway, back up a curb ramp, back onto your level. It's all one smooth, continuous level for you. It makes it a much more attractive ride. to be able to provide that continuous level. So that's one of the benefits. Another benefit is the priority is actually awarded to you as the rider or as the person crossing here. So vehicles, as they get to this conflict point, they actually need to stop and give way to any pedestrians and cyclists riding through there. You can't see it, but there's signage that supports this, just to acknowledge to drivers that that's what they need to do. They don't have right of way here. So there's that continuity aspect as well. It's just a nice, smooth ride. What's also really critical and something that we should take from the safety lens is whenever we have raised features and we're raising, the pavement, what we're actually doing is slowing down vehicles. And we know that when we're slowing down vehicles, we are reducing the likelihood of a crash. When you're slowing down vehicles, drivers have a much better opportunity to actually apply emergency braking and avoid a collision altogether. But also, lower speeds means that if a collision does occur, it's likely to be more within the realm of survivable, okay? So it's less likely to result in death or serious injury. So it's a much safer outcome for our pedestrians and riders within this space. So lots and lots of positives to sting about raising the conflict point where you've got a shared path crossing over a road. I've got these two separate examples now, and the one on the left, I'll just refer to as example A. That's from Victoria. One on the right, that's up in Brisbane. I'll say that's option B. Perhaps you can understand why I started this session off just saying that the signage and the pavement marking, it looks different no matter where you are. This is a good example of that. But they're both doing the same thing. Both of these examples are a shared path crossing over a carriageway, and both of them have been raised. My question that I'd like you to answer in the chat is, my preferred treatment is A. And I want you to pop down in the chat any thoughts or ideas of why you think I would say that. So what is it about option B that is not as attractive or not as safe? I'll give you 25 seconds to give that one a crack. All right, good responses coming in. I did say a question come in. That give way sign, it's actually facing general traffic, so that give way applies to the traffic lane. So motorists are forced to give way to path users there. Very, very good points that I can see raised in the chat. The specific items that I suppose I was really looking out for was the conflict point angle. So in option A, the conflict point is more or less perpendicular. And when we have 90-degree angles, we generally have much better sight lines. So you can kind of see even the face on that rider, they're pretty easy for them to just be able to turn their head to check if there's any vehicles that are yielding, stopping there. and make that eye contact. Now, of course, the priority is awarded to that rider. However, it would be naive for them to assume that all traffic are just going to give way. Instead, it's much more, reasonable to make that eye contact and ensure that that relationship is understood, that priority is understood. If we compared that to our option B here in Brisbane, if we're writing down here, we basically get to this point here, and you need to turn your neck close to 180 degrees to see if there's going to be any vehicles there at the hold line. Super uncomfortable to do that, particularly as you're also trying to navigate a turn. You've got a lot there to process. So from the perspective of the rider, it's just an uncomfortable experience. Also from the perspective of the driver, you may be giving way here and look at the give way sign and really just be focusing on riders coming towards you, not necessarily thinking about riders in the same direction as you. Okay, so there's that detriment there as well. I didn't want to use this as an example to berate the Brisbane Bicentennial Bike Path. I think it's an excellent project. I just wanted to showcase why the conflict point angle is important, and the closer that we can bring that to 90 degrees, the better our ability is to maximize those sight angles. This is what it looks like there on the ground, and you can actually see that there has been lots of kind of braking from riders, inferring perhaps there has been lots of emergency maneuvers there because, the driver has failed to yield and there hasn't been, clear priority assigned there. All right, we'll move on to bollards and have a good chat through these devices. So shared paths crossing roads, we love to see the use of the raised conflict point, but it's certainly not uncommon to see the use of bollards, which are, a fairly, not a very attractive or amenable way to go about things. Bollards historically have been used to, the way they were used to be used was to let riders know that they're approaching a road, and perhaps even to slow down cycling traffic. That's no longer recommended to be used for that purpose. Instead, it is still used to deter vehicle entry. My kind of conversation around that is really good conversation to have with your stakeholders is how likely is it to actually get vehicles entering this space? Like, are we talking about a 1 in 10 year possible outcome? Are we talking about a 1 in 100? Like, how probable is this event to actually occur? The reason I put it in that perspective is because the bollards are a 24-hour a day, 7-day a week hazard for cyclists. As I spoke about before, you want to create a half-meter offset from the edge of the shared path to any fixed hazard. Well, bollards are placed right in the middle of shared paths, so clearly do not meet that criteria, and they should be treated exactly as that. They are hazards, and they do cause serious injury to riders. So just a few examples of typical bollards we see. Sometimes they've got the nice reflective tape on them and they're installed, in multiple locations at the edge of shared paths as well as the middle. Generally, the reasons you'd see situations like this is to deter mini bike, motorbike entry, because that's seen as a problem. Middle example is more of those architectural bollards, which I really am not a big fan of because they do a very good job of blending in with the surrounding context. So definitely want to make sure that whatever you are proposing, it's incredibly legible in all times of the day. The one on the right here, the banana bars, these are no longer installed. Used to be installed in Gold Coast and Brisbane, but yeah, no longer installed them because they've just got this really awkward pinch point, basically. So if you're trying to enter and exit at the same time, it gets a bit dicey. A few other common bollards that we may see, timber bollards, you know, particularly where they've got the ability to be taken out with some locks and things like that. Chicane type of treatments. These ones I find can be a little bit more attractive, certainly a bit more legible. But what we have found is with the installation of those types of chicane treatments, if you make that passageway too narrow, you can actually create issues for people with cargo bikes or, you know, longer bicycles, bikes with trailers. They can actually get stuck in those little gated areas. So you probably want to make sure that you're designing and catering for the needs of all riders within that space. The photo on the right is from Hobart using a U-shaped type of bollard. So just coming off the shared path here, and then as riders are about to enter a bit more of like a shared area, car parking zone, they've just put this as like a warning to be like, hey, you're about to enter a different space. But I'm not really convinced that's the right way to go about that warning, because, you know, although you look at it in this scenario and it's incredibly obvious and you think, why is this an issue? Like, so easy to see that. When you are riding in a pack, or, you know, not necessarily anyone you know of, but you just happen to be riding behind someone, their entire envelope, their body completely masks anything that could be in front of you. So you're basically relying on them to make the right choice. So it could be very, very obvious for the person in front to see that type of bollard in place, but the person behind has no idea it's there. The first person kind of veers off at the last second, and then the second person collides into it. That's generally where we see these collisions occurring with bollards, is those masking type effects. So when you are riding in larger groups. And an example of that actually is this fellow here. His name is Andrew. And a few years ago, he actually rode into this bollard that we see there on the left. It happens to just be around the corner from our office. Yeah, he reached out to council, and at council a few days later, they decided to get the spray cans out, and they gave it a bit of a facelift and upgraded the reflecting tape on there. But what he did, when he did collide with it, what occurred was he broke his wrist and he had some facial injuries as well. Whilst he was on the ground, gave the ambos a call, and while waiting for the ambulance to arrive, he witnessed 3 other collisions with the exact same bollard. So within that space of 40 minutes or so, there's been 4 collisions with the same bollard. And there's a few reasons I bring this up. Is number one, just to make a comment that cycling injuries are incredibly underreported. Lots of cyclists do not know who or if they're allowed to talk to anyone, and we don't necessarily have the data of all the collisions that have occurred on our network. But we do know that collisions with bollards are very, very common. The other thing is just to say that this particular gentleman decided to, you know, take this into the legal realm, said that that's not good enough, that you're just putting these hazards in the shared path, and this is supposed to be a space for cyclists, and what are you thinking about, and decided to sue council. So there's a bit of another reason to perhaps start thinking about, well, what other design solutions could we offer within this space to provide that vehicle entry, but not always have that constant hazard. So an example from the Austroads guide of what can be completed instead of the bollards is very, very similar kind of idea with how we would treat minor legs approaching a main thoroughfare on a, road network. Basically, install a splitter island. If you put in a splitter island in the middle of the shared path, you can use curb and channel, you can use landscaping, you could use a bollard within that space if you're able to maintain those clearances either side of it, by all means. Very, very obvious as you're coming up to this point here that you will see, okay, something in the shared path is changing. I know I'm approaching a road. Something's definitely changing about this environment. But the fact that there is some kind of infrastructure in the middle there, and you've only got a 1.4 meter path there, a 1.4 meter path there, you've greatly reduced the risk of errant vehicles deliberately accessing that space. So this is kind of what we take as, a better practice to mitigate that as a risk. Certainly don't believe in just whacking in a bollard and think job's done. One example of where we've seen this kind of philosophy applied is in the attached photo. And, you can see that they've created this little splitter island. They've used grass in the middle there. They've also been able to maintain the half-meter offset, so they have plonked in some bollards. But just a note on these bollards in particular, they've got little solar panels on the top of them, and so they charge themselves up during the day, and then at night they illuminate, so it's very, very easy to see them as a hazard during those low light conditions, so it's a pretty jazzy little product. But yeah, just wanted to show you that actually been installed in practice. I spoke about this briefly before, our DDA requirements, absolutely still relevant with all aspects of the shared path. One thing that often comes up is whether or not we need to install the tactile ground surface indicators, TGSIs. Yes, you generally have to do them even when you're crossing the road at a raised conflict point. Even if you've got the priority for vulnerable road users there, it's really important that people with vision impairments, or they're blind, or they've got those disabilities, that they are able to recognize they're about to cross the road. Okay, so none of that changes. Still really, really important that we've got that information for those people. All right, shared paths crossing over other shared paths. I'll do a quick little final exercise for the day, which is just a question for you all. Pop your answers in the chat. We've got a very confused looking cyclist there, and the question I've got is, what do you think is wrong with this photo? So I'll get rid of her so you can have a better look. DDA is Disability Discrimination Act. Yes, I just saw that quickly come through the chat.
Right.
Marissa.
We've had a question from earlier on. Keen to know your thoughts on the use of yellow surface treatment on signalised crossings, pedestrian and cyclists. Do you think there's a risk of users having a false sense of priority at times, even when the lights are red, given how yellow surfaces are used for priority crossings, and where do they have priority?
I actually I agree. I think that could be misconstrued by path users. I see the yellow, I get the priority. That's just how it works in Victoria. It's not in other jurisdictions. And I don't necessarily think that should be combined in a signal environment. Unless there's actual research to suggest otherwise, I do think there is a risk there of having that ambiguity or being misinterpreted as always having priority.
Yeah.
Good question.
Thanks.
Okay, let's have a quick squiz through the chats. No priority, unclear, right of way, no lines, no sign marking. Who has right of way? Brilliant. Glad to hear we're all on the same page here. So, yep, this is an actual example of me getting very frustrated riding along here and coming up to this Y intersection and just having no idea where I was meant to go. And it's not a safety issue. It's just frustrating. It's something that can be easily rectified. So wayfinding signage, as it's referred to, just installing nice big, signpost here with this direction will take you to the train station and this direction will take you to the hot spa, whatever it is. Just clarifying where those routes will go. Super, super important detail that unfortunately is pretty neglected. But the other really good point there is just the confusion around the priority. So just to draw that one out in case that's not 100% familiar with you, if you haven't heard that term. Basically, you want to assign one leg as like the main thoroughfare, or this is the predominant journey. And then the other leg would get the treatment. So what I would do if I was redesigning this, I would first actually square up this type of intersection. So let's see if I can do this. See what my drawing skills are like today. So all of that would just be grass now. And you'd have riders as they're coming along this direction on the minor leg, there'd be a stop or a give way, line marking, as well as a sign. So it's crystal clear. You're on the minor leg, you give way to the thoroughfare. Don't create the ambiguity. Don't make it a free-for-all, because that's what will happen. And riders will just assume they're good to go and keep going because they just want to maintain speed. So make it crystal clear. Don't make it ambiguous. With regards to the wayfinding, Austroads does have a bicycle wayfinding report produced a few years ago now, basically acknowledging that across Australia and New Zealand, we do not do things consistently, and we should be improving on our practices within that space. None of this is rocket science. None of this is going to really test your understandings or the limits of engineering or sign design or anything like this. You just want to make it consistent messaging, consistent colors. What are the destinations where the bicycle route is going to, and providing that clear treatment. Other countries do it much better than us, and it's actually really, really common to use numbering as a route. So the left-hand photo is from Copenhagen in Denmark, and route number 2, that's going to take you from the local football ground to the market square in the city centre. And if you're on route number 2, you don't need to worry about speaking a word of the language because you know where you're going to get to go. Really, really good idea. Similar idea on the right-hand side there in the Netherlands. The final discussion point for today is managing cyclist speeds at conflict points. I've got this example here just on the outskirts of Perth, City West Station. And along here is kind of the pedestrian boom gate. I actually don't know the technical term for that, but those areas where, the gates kind of close on pedestrians when the train's coming, and then they open up and you get this huge amount of pedestrian activity occurring. All those pedestrians, once it opens, they walk up and travel along this path and then go to the, the platforms to then get the train. Happens to run right in front of where the shared path is. So what the designers have opted to go for is, well, I'm going to make sure that it feels a little bit different. So we've got some curb being installed here. We've got a little splitter island that's been installed, some give way. All of these are supplementary treatments just to be able to communicate to riders that they're approaching a space that is not just another part of the shared path network, but they're approaching something that's very different. So just trying to make those changes to help help with that messaging. I think another way that I suppose this could have been managed is, as we spoke about with vehicles as they're approaching conflict points, we love to raise them. You can also raise them if it's for pedestrians. So if there was like a crossing like this for pedestrians, I have to move some stuff out of my way. It wouldn't look exactly like that. It's not the best drawing. But if there was like a raised feature, that would physically slow down riders. So you're no longer relying on riders to pick up on, you know, visual cues. You're physically slowing them down because you're installing a ramp. Now, the ramp that I've got there would look like something that you put in a skate park. It's not meant to be so dramatic. It's not meant to actually attract BMX riders. It's meant to just wipe off some of the speed for bike riders. So as they're coming to a highly pedestrianized zone, they can be more aware of that surrounding land use, and hopefully, dissipate some of that energy. In saying that, other things we've seen installed are pavement markings. I don't think they offer any significant benefit. It's actually pretty unlikely a rider would be able to read that and then change their behavior before they get to that conflict point, just because of, you know, they're riding along. But we've certainly seen those types of things being installed as well. That is the end of the content for today. And I did just want to touch on, I suppose, the final point for this discussion, which is how do we end our shared paths? This is not a good example of it. I should also clarify that this does not look like this anymore, and this has been completed. But it did look like this for many years. When we are doing our shared paths, we should be thinking about, are we providing a strategic connection between, you know, points of interest, points where riders want to access, and then, you know, they want to actually spend time there, or what's going to, you know, provide additional transport opportunities, go catch the bus, go catch the train, whatever it is. It kind of needs to make sense. We can't just be putting up a shared path end signs and then assume that all demand for riding in that area, it ceases to exist, because it's not how the real world works. And we need to just be cognizant of that in all of our projects to ensure that we're meeting those kind of demands and the needs of that community. Marissa, did you want to go through the LMS, or did you want me to flick through it?
Yeah, I can go through it.
Yeah,
Not
no.
a problem. Just get it up on my screen and I'll share that. Okay, how's that coming through? All right. You can see that? Great. Okay, so hopefully you've all been able to access the LMS and you've already had a look onto the page here. Just a bit of a welcome area for you. We've got a link to each of the webinar sessions right there, and we've got a little introductions page where you can pop in a hello and a bit of an intro background on who you are. Some of you already done that, so thank you very much. We've got a bunch of resources here that you are free to browse. We've got some reference documents and guides and so on here. Lots in here for you to go through, lots that Max will probably refer to throughout each of the webinars. So please feel free to browse any of them and download and keep as many as you like. We have, and also if you have any resources that you would like to provide yourself, we have a bit of a folder here that you can click into and upload anything you like that you'd like to share with the group. So feel free to add any of your resources there. For module 1 today, we have the presentation that Max has delivered. So you're free to browse that and have a look at any of the content that you might have missed. Also in this module 1 area, we will upload the recording from today. So that will be available in probably about a couple of hours from now. We'll upload the recording there. So if you do need to watch this webinar back for any reason at all, it will be there for you to watch. I'll get Max to touch on the 360-degree video. Do you want me to open that link for you, Max?
Yep. So we'll get everyone just to have a go at watching this prior to our next module. It's basically a 360-degree video. It works the same way as Google Street View. So once the ad's done, you can just grab your little mouse there and pan around and have a look around what's going on there. Ken and I, this is us having a quick little chat around, you know, what this is all about. And then we actually ride through some different examples. So we'll get you to watch this video before our next module, just so we've got your feedback and we can hear how you found riding through different facilities.
Great. And all right, just going back to the LMS. Oh, I'm on the wrong course. It's okay. Oh no,
I think if you go back to the
I've got to
YouTube,
go back. Yeah, I've got to go back. There we go. All right, we're back. Okay, so just back down to module 1. Yep, so there's a 360-degree video for you to have a look at, and we also have a quiz for you to do. So just click on the module 1 quiz, and there's a little button there, attempt quiz, and that will take you just to 9 multiple choice questions. Fairly simple, shouldn't take you too long to do that one. But we do need you to complete, that is one of the tasks. There will only be 2 quizzes for this course, but the module 1 quiz is one of them. And that's where you can access it there. Yeah, if you have any issues accessing the LMS, please let us know. And we'll get that sorted out for you fairly quickly.
right? Any final questions there, Ainsley?
No, we are all good with the questions today. Thanks, Max.
Excellent. Well, thanks everyone for joining. Look forward to catching up in the next module, and yeah, have a lovely day.
See you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.